Okay, Ravi Ramnarain, CPA, is the CEO of Ravi Ramnarain CPA LLC, a
Mhm.
public company accounting oversight board, PCAOB listed CPA firm based in Naples, Florida. The 14-person firm is licensed in Florida and Arkansas and handles audit and accounting work for public companies, privately held companies, and governmental entities of all sizes. Mr. Ramnarain is also the managing partner of South Florida Tax Firm LLC, which
Mhm.
focuses on individual and small business taxation. Mr. Ramnarain was born and raised in the northeastern United States and has two MS degrees, Masters of Science, in accounting and taxation from
Mhm.
Boston College and Nova University in New York City. Do I have that right? Hold on.
Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, in Fort Lauderdale, and bachelor's from Fordham University, New York City. He and his wife, Devin Ramnarain, who co-own both of the aforementioned companies, reside in Naples, Florida. Did I get that? Should I
Yeah,
run through that again, or is that pretty is a good start
that's
jumping off point?
that's that's very very accurate.
That's
Yeah,
our
no,
jumping off point, and I'm going to throw it to you to tell us more about yourself, so it kind of flows right in. But you could expand
sure.
on that. But before we do so, your contact information is what for people who want to get in touch with you. We're going to jump into some accounting work today, some other topics. But if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
There'll be two ways, since as you mentioned, there are two companies that my wife and I own. The best way to reach me directly, Ravi at raviramcpa.com. So that's RAV as in Victor I at RAV as in Victor I. RAM as in Mary, CPA.com. And then for the second company, South Florida Tax Firm, it would just be contact at southfloridataxfirm.com. One word, just as it sounds.
All right, thank you very much, Ravi. We'll do that again at the end for people who want to reach out. So,
Sure.
we're going to talk some accounting today because you're a CPA, meaning Certified Public Accountant.
Mhm.
So, see that there, and also your wife has a business as well, Devin, right? She has a business as well. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that today, if we have time
Sure.
permitting. Time permitting.
Yes.
And so, what's the deal with accounting? Tell us a little bit about accounting. We'll start off with that.
I like to say a couple things on that. Basically, necessity is the mother of invention, if you will. I would call myself an accidental accountant. As I know, you were there at Fordham with me a couple years ahead of me, so you're well aware of kind of the economic landscape in New York City in the early 2000s. I was majoring in finance, well, business administration, concentration in finance at Fordham, and I had an internship already through a family connection. So it's like, okay, wow, I'm gonna have my job set up, and this is gonna be great. 9/11 happens, the economy kind of goes into the toilet, and companies were just not hiring finance majors who didn't come from Harvard or Penn or whatnot. So it's like, okay, graduation day came, no job, and honestly, I remember graduation day speaking with you. You were there as I graduated with your brother, so you were there at the graduation as well, and we were talking about Deloitte. I believe you were with Deloitte at the time, and I was thinking about doing a master's in accounting, and that's a great way to kind of hedge against a bad economy to just kind of find a guaranteed job. I'd rather have a guaranteed 70, $80,000 a year job than make 250 one year than be on the unemployment line the next year. So I figured accounting was the way to go, become a CPA, and that's kind of the path that I followed from there. Just went from Fordham immediately to Boston College for a master's in accounting.
Mhm.
Got into Deloitte Boston after that. Moved on to Florida after that, as my family had relocated to Florida, and just kept it going for another year there. I switched over to EY, but I realized being in that environment that I just kind of wanted to be in a more, what's the right way to say this, more stable type of environment. When you're in industry, the hours are not as crazy, and the expectations still high but not as intense as public accounting, because I wanted to kind of take a different approach. I eventually wanted to go into business for myself, and being in the public accounting environment, I don't think things would have manifested that way if I had stayed in the big four.
Mhm. Okay. So since I didn't exactly go smoothly with the bio, I'll ask you a couple of things to expand on. So then so
Sure.
Nova Southeastern, Boston College I'm familiar with, Fordham University I'm familiar with, Fordham.
Mhm.
So there's two there, and then there's also Nova Southeastern. So I'm not familiar with that. So can you tell me a little bit more about that, and the audience a little bit more about that?
Sure. So how that happened, again, I worked two busy seasons in public accounting, got into banking, and it was kind of building a couple of side businesses while I was working as well, and also taught for Becker CPA once I became a CPA. Once I eventually passed the CPA exam in 2007, and then from there, it was a situation where it's actually funny. Like I said before, necessity is the mother of invention. I wanted to reciprocate my Massachusetts CPA license in Florida.
Mhm.
So, okay, I figure fill out the paperwork, done deal. And it turned out that, at least at the time, Florida required some extra credits. I'm like, I have a master's degree already. Why do I need extra credits?
Mhm.
But Florida is like that because everybody in the world wants to, come to Florida, as we're seeing now with the whole migration to Florida from New York and, the Latin American countries and whatnot, Europe. But everybody wants to come to Florida, so that's a way of kind of making sure there's not a glut of CPAs, registered in Florida, to just make them kind of take extra classes. I think it was like 3 or 4 extra classes that they wanted. And then I'm like, if I'm going to do that, why don't I just do another master's? My employer was willing to pay for a master's in tax at Nova Southeastern, which is a large university. It's actually based in Davie, Florida, just outside of Fort Lauderdale, and ironically 2 blocks away from where I was living at the time. So it's like perfect. I can just work and then just go to class on Friday nights, all day Saturday. And I basically did that for 3 years on and off, and was able to get a second master's in my mid 30s.
Okay. So CPA, meaning certified public accountants, got that license, right? And then also this education background. So the accounting degree, right, which is a master's degree, and that's from Boston College, yes?
Yeah, so that was one very intense year. It was actually a calendar year. It was 2 semesters and 2 intense summer sessions
Mhm.
of 2 classes each to get that master's. Honestly, it was great not only from the skills and lessons learned and a feeder to getting into the Big Four, but made a bunch of lifelong friends there as well. So that was people that I'm still in contact with today, just kind of like the New York days. But Boston College was kind of an extension of that. I guess it was a little different there versus Fordham, because Fordham I was a commuter student, so you don't really get the same experience, if you will. And then in Boston College, even though it was grad school, I lived a block away from campus, so you're just pretty much a part of everything,
Mhm.
from scholastic as well as an extracurricular
Mhm.
standpoint. So it was a great experience.
Okay. So the way I remember it, there were three things we needed to do in accounting to get a CPA. It was have the education, number one. Number
Hmm.
two was pass an exam, which were four parts at the time. And then the experience requirements. So those were kind of the big three, was
Hmm.
education, exam, and experience. Is that still the way it is these days? Those three to get the CPA license?
So yes and no. I'm sure you've seen some of the news articles where they're trying to walk back that 150-hour requirement in a lot of states now.
Mhm.
I think Florida may or may not be one of them. I'd have to double check. But what I do know is, for the longest time since the whole Enron situation, and then SOX coming out in 2004, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. We can get into that a little bit if you want, but
Mhm.
um, the requirement was 150 hours, whether you did 120 hours undergrad and an extra 30 hours, or if you just went ahead and did 4 years and then did a master's.
Mhm.
In at least the state that I was first registered in, Massachusetts, they didn't have any experience requirement per se.
Mhm.
Um, but well, actually, that's not true. Um, I was able to license right away, but I think there was still kind of an after the fact. Hey, can you just verify like your that you did 1,000 hours or something like that, of work? And I was able to get that through Deloitte,
Mhm.
and I was all set there. And then when I came to Florida, it was similar. I had to kind of verify all of my education and whatnot, and then just have at the time the CFO of the company that I was working with sign off on the fact that I had worked X amount of hours over the past I believe year.
Okay. So for somebody who might be listening that's considering become an accountant. Maybe they're looking to major in it. Maybe they're looking to change careers. There's this notion of stability, right, or job security. So a lot of times that's on somebody's mind as they enter the accounting field. So waiting
Right.
somebody who's listening who's looking to get in, maybe they're undergraduate level now. Maybe somebody looking to change careers. So I heard about some of that stability, right, that security. So I would love to
Hmm.
hear a little more about that, and then we could also talk about how to obtain a CPA license because it's also state by state, right? Which gets a little complicated. Each state has their own kind of different ways to get
Yes.
licensure. All right, so that gets a little complex. But would you? agree with me that it's kind of those big three things usually to get the education, get some experience, and get the exam pass? Those that covers, or are there other things that need to be done as well?
Yes, from a general standpoint, those are the things that you need. The biggest thing I could tell people who are in school right now is, try to learn the material as well as you can the first time around. You want to try and get the CPA exam out of the way before you really get into your career. Obviously, I had been working for, what was it, 3.5 years until I finally sat down and just, basically took it seriously and passed it. But it's very, very difficult to do that when you're already working, especially if you're working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. The last thing you want to do is come home and study. I would highly recommend learning it very well the first time. And, I'm not, I haven't been taught for Becker or been paid by Becker or anything like that since 2011. But I will say that that is the best CPA prep program. If you want to become a CPA, they really take the super complex and make it super easy to understand. And if you can master the Becker concepts, it's not a question of if you'll pass, it's a question of when.
Okay. So with that notion or that narrative, okay, accounting is a stable profession, right? Would you agree for that would you agree with that statement that accounting is a
Yes.
secure?
Yes, despite like, AI and all the stuff that you hear about, everybody, outsourcing to India, and we can talk about that a little later if you wish as well. I would say it's an extremely stable profession. You're going to have a job. Even today, 2025, you get an accounting degree, you get the CPA, you're going to have a job. Someone's going to hire you. You're not going to starve. And if you, for some whatever reason, if you're in a location that's not hiring CPAs or whatever, you can hang a shingle and start doing taxes. You'll have work.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, thinking about the bio here and looking at the public companies that are listed here, privately held companies, and governmental entities. So, let's take those first two, the public companies. So, when I see public companies, I'm thinking publicly traded companies, right? And then, secondly, the privately held. So, can you do a compare and contrast on a publicly traded company and a privately held company. Those two.
As far as audits or accounting work or both, or
Well, let me rephrase. So, if let's say a privately held company. So, when I think privately held, they're not traded on an exchange like Nasdaq, for example. So, it's privately held, so it's a small business or sole proprietor.
right,
Let's say it's a manufacturing company, right? So,
right.
that privately held company, are they required by law to have to interact with the CPA in any way? In any way, is that a requirement for a privately held company to do so?
Okay. So for a privately held company, it really depends. So it depends which industry they're in. Obviously, if they're like a privately held bank or that sort of thing, they're going to have certain regulatory reports.
Mhm.
It would be advisable to have a CPA, handling that, whether it's the call report, your different federal reports, 2900, 2644, whatever the case may be. It's not a dead set requirement. At least it wasn't while I was in banking, I would say, but it's something that it's a best practice, especially when an auditor does come in. As far as the year-end audit or like the monthly financials, again, for the monthly financials, not so much a requirement for somebody to be a CPA, as far as laws and such. But if they are looking for funding, or if they're looking for any sort of investor to come in and take their financials seriously, then those financials would have to be vetted by a CPA, and that's where you'd go and hire an external audit firm, to handle you know the audit, to basically go through the year's uh, P&Ls, balance sheets, statements of cash flows, whatnot, and go through all the underlying records that roll up into those financials and verify that they are, some level of. It's not. They're not looking for 100% accuracy. They're looking for reasonable assurance.
Great. And with the publicly traded companies, right? So that means that they're traded on the Nasdaq, and that the Securities and Exchange Commission is involved in oversight, right? So in that case, please correct me, but in that case, they absolutely have to interact with the CPA by law. Is that fair to say? If a public traded company, they need CPAs working either at their firm or externally. Fair to say?
Yes. So definitely for the external audit, like I said before, you need to hire an external audit firm. But in the case of a publicly traded company, they would have to be that external audit firm would have to be registered, which sorry, by the PCAOB, as you mentioned, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board.
Mhm.
And those companies, those PCAOB companies, including us, we have to have a certain number of CPAs on staff. When you submit the paperwork to the PCAOB, they'll ask how many licensed accountants you have, and that's something that you can easily pull up on the PCAOB website for any public company accounting oversight board firm.
Mhm.
So yeah, absolutely. From an internal standpoint, more often than not, the CFOs of publicly traded companies are CPAs. I know that's changing a little bit with like private equity guys coming in and being CFOs who don't necessarily have the accounting knowledge, but they have the overall, finance knowledge. But if the CFO is not a CPA, oftentimes the controller or the chief accounting officer are, and you'll have a number of CPAs. In fact, out of all the public companies that I've dealt with from an accounting standpoint, I haven't really seen one where there were no CPAs at all.
Interesting. Okay. And on the privately held side, I found it noteworthy that the credibility factor, right? If you're looking to bring in outside money, if you're looking to scale, to have CPAs signing off on things or interacting with your company yields credibility. Where a privately held company could probably, in some ways, sometimes get away with not interacting with a CPA. Maybe have somebody without that license do some accounting for them, or they do it
Right.
themselves. But when the rubber meets the road and serious people come in and look at the financials, it gives them great comfort to see that the CPA has been all over it. That was noteworthy for me because sometimes there's some corner cutting that goes out there. Oh, do I really need a CPA? Can I maybe could get away with it in a privately held company, but it's not advisable. Fair to say.
Well, it's like it's something I saw on LinkedIn not too long ago. It's like if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, wait till you see how expensive it is to hire an amateur.
Oh, love it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the privately held companies. We talked a little bit about the publicly held. Now, this is third one here. So three of three is governmental entities.
Mhm.
So you also have clients that are governmental entities? Okay.
Yes. So what's happened? Ironically, it's funny. So we recently became PCAOB registered, so that allows us to do publicly traded company audits, if you will. But what's been happening is we've had a lot of private companies reach out. We've had a lot of government entities reach out because that PCAOB stamp, if you will. We talk about credibility. It just literally it puts you in a different light. So there are a lot of governments out there that we talked about funding. There are a lot of governments where they have to have an audit in order to get state funding to have certain have access to certain state and federal dollars and whatnot. And you'd be surprised at the number of governmental entities throughout the country that just don't have a timely audit. I can name one state in particular. There's some cities and counties there that go back 10 years without having an audit. And then suddenly they're not getting any funding and they're scrambling to try and find an auditor. And the problem there is that there are a lot of, there are a few players in the market as far as governmental auditing, but the fees are onerous. They're charging big four type fees, and we all know what those are: the $600, $700, $800 an hour, which a small town in XYZ state is not going to be able to afford. So we fill a bit of a niche that way. But as far as the need for a CPA, so a lot of times you'll have a state comptroller. Oftentimes they are a CPA, but the finance directors and other staff that are working within the governmental entities are not necessarily CPAs. So it's kind of it's hit or miss, really.
Okay. So we have those three. So we have to get a CPA license, it's going to be that. And I'm breaking this down for people that want to enter the field, right? So that experience, that education, the exam, right? And here we have types of organizations that can become clients, which are privately held, publicly traded, as well as government. Let's do another series of three. So there's the P&L, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows. When I think of financial statements, those are kind of the big three. So maybe you could walk us through those three types of financial statements and what a P&L stands for, and maybe get into the details on that, please.
Sure. I guess yeah, we could start with the P&L. So the profit and loss statement, the income statement, if you will. It shows the revenues and expenses of the company for the period. Usually, if you're doing a 1 year um, set of financials starting on January 1st through December 31st, the P&L, if you will show the income, the expenses, and then what your net income will be. Uh, the balance sheet is a snapshot of what you have as far as assets, liabilities, and equity. And the changes in the balance sheet in the equity section from the prior year to the current year are basically the difference in the basically the P&L activity for the year is going to be your change in you know equity, retained earnings and whatnot. You have your beginning balance of retained earnings, you have your net income or loss. You also account for your dividends, and then you'll have your ending balance of retained earnings. That's all incorporated into the balance sheet. So just high level, P&L is activity for the year. Balance sheet is like taking a picture, like a snapshot of your assets, liabilities, and equity at the end of the year.
Mhm.
Uh, and then you have your statement of cash flows, which is basically your change in cash. So on the balance sheet, you'll have, let's say, fiscal year 24 and 25, you have X amount of cash for one year, X amount of cash for the next year. The
Mhm.
cash flow statement actually shows all of the ins and outs from an operating, investing, and financing standpoint. And it's a very robust statement. And depending on the industry, you'll have a certain amount of detail there. So you can see, just again, changes in balance sheet accounts, investments that came in and went out, and then financing activities as well. And then you'll have some supplemental data at the end of the cash flow statement. And then you also have a statement of equity, which is what it sounds. It's just the changes in equity from the beginning of the year to the end of the year.
Mhm.
And then the financial statements will also have notes to the financials, and those are basically high level. They're just disclosures that talk about each of the major. You'll start with like the significant accounting policies, background on the company, things like that, and then it'll go into the different uh, material items on the balance sheet and P&L as far as what they are and how they were accounted for.
Okay. So I always wonder, so P&L stands for profit and loss, right? But it's used so interchangeably with the word, the phrase income statement. So
Yes.
that's always kind of confused me why there's two. What's the reason for that? To have a nickname for it, or is there a difference between a P&L and an income statement?
So no difference per se. P&L is kind of more of like a industry jargon, if you will.
Mhm.
I will say though that when you're dealing with different governments and nonprofits, they'll have different names for the P&L. Some
Mhm.
might call it a statement of income and expenses. Some might say, changes in net assets, things like that. So it just really depends on the industry that you're in. But a general terminology, income statement, P&L, I think you're perfectly fine with either one.
Okay. What do you like most about the accounting profession?
I mean, I guess I'm a little biased. It's provided me with a pretty consistent, so far. Oh God, I'm getting up there now. 22-year career.
Mhm.
I've never really had to worry about. Before I went into business for myself in 2015, I never really had to worry about finding a job or anything like that. So I feel like it's been great. Again, as far as the stability is concerned. I think it's opened up a lot of doors, from a business standpoint, and obviously the people that you meet, just when you're even a low level auditor and you're dealing with the CEOs and CFOs of major companies, it's a really cool thing.
Mhm. Okay. And let's go back in time a little bit, right? Let's go back in the day, right? So you and I know each other
Sure.
for a long time, right? We know each other from so here it says you're raised in northeastern United States. But let's get a town in there. What city are you from? What town are you from? Because that's we have a commonality there. So talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll go way back even if you
Okay.
want, because it's a pretty interesting story as
Please
far as
go.
how I ended up in New York and all that. But
Please.
born in Hartford, Connecticut, raised mostly in Hartford County, Connecticut for 13 years. It was a little different than Queens. It's just, it's funny because everyone says, oh, Connecticut, they talk about Stamford, they talk about Greenwich. It's like, no, Northern Connecticut is, it's Iowa, basically. It's just very, very remote. And yeah, you're basically between Boston and New York City, but as far as your day to day, I spent my more formative years, ages 8 to 13, in a town called Enfield, Connecticut. So basically grades 3 through 7. And what you did for entertainment there is you went to the movies or you went to the local amusement park. There wasn't really a whole lot going on there. But I think for that time in my life, it was good. It was, I was able to go to public school because the public schools there were actually pretty good. You could do that and then just kind of carve out your niche there. And then, obviously you play sports as well. And that's where I really learned how to play a little bit of basketball and that sort of thing in the middle of nowhere. It's actually funny. Enfield is only like 15 minutes from Springfield, Massachusetts, where basketball was invented. So obviously it was a big thing there. So that was good. But then, long story short, my father got a job in New York City in my summer between 7th and 8th grade. So we just kind of packed up and drove the 2.5 hours and, you know, landed in South Queens, which was, kind of a it was a very interesting place because it was like a combination of the suburbs in Connecticut, and then also you have the city. You have the buses and the trains and all that. And uh, I wouldn't say it's culture shock because I'd been visiting New York very often since I have a lot of family there. We drive down from Connecticut all the time. For the first 13 years I was alive, but then living there was a totally different animal. And that's where I met you and your family. And we were told that we kind of had to go to Catholic school if we were going to go to school there. It's like we've been going to public school and we're Hindus. What are we going to do in a Catholic school? But OLPH, Our Lady of Perpetual Help, took me in. And it was a little rough at first, just the transition, but, met people like you and others. And, you know, I had no idea about the co-op exam, and suddenly I got to start getting ready for high school the next year. And where am I going to go to school after this? And you and your family were definitely great and kind of helping me, like, just kind of get my what's the right way to say it, like my feet, like, planted, and just really determining which path to take. And I remember the competition level of basketball was just so much crazier in New York. I mean, I think the first pickup game I played at OLPH with some of my eighth grade teammates there, and then you and Richard Curcio and some of those other high school guys. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed out here. But it was great, and a great like trial by fire, getting thrown right in the fire and learning just everything about New York was just so much more competitive than living in suburbia there. So it was great.
Okay, wonderful. And I just want to make sure South Ozone Park got a shout out
Yes.
there because that's where
Yes.
we connected initially, and then we have this journey that kind of. I wonder for anybody who's listening or watching, I'd be really curious if anybody themselves or knows anybody that has the same combination. So we went to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, then we
Yes.
went to Archbishop Malloy High School in Briarwood,
Yes.
Queens, Fordham University in the Bronx. And then we both worked at Deloitte.
Deloitte.
So,
Yeah.
so we have. I would wonder if anybody, because that's quite a coincidence, right? So,
Yes.
I'd be really curious who else has that, all four, or even the trifecta. We went to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, Archbishop Malloy, and Fordham University. Or I don't know if you know anybody who has, but I'd be curious. I'd be curious. It's a nice,
For all,
it's a nice combination.
yeah, if you take out the Deloitte, I can think of a couple guys, but
Okay.
other than that, yeah, with Deloitte, I think it's just you and me.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about South Ozone Park a little bit because that was
Sure.
a great place to grow up. And what did you like about, say, Our Lady of Perpetual Help as a school?
Um, I guess the first thing is, yeah, I'm very glad I didn't end up in public school in New York City. That was it was either, like I said before, go to public school or go to a Catholic school that right there, basically in the neighborhood. I think it
Mhm.
was maybe half a mile away from where I lived, OPH, but maybe a mile. But I think yeah, no, it was definitely a great way to transition into New York life, and honestly put me on that whole like Catholic high school route because I wasn't sure what was going to happen after eighth grade. I didn't know anything about the school system in New York City or anything like that at the time. So it was a great feeder, if you will, for Archbishop Malloy. I don't think I would have ended up at Malloy if not for that one year at OLPH. So that was really cool. And the couple of the teachers that I had there in eighth grade were very great. In fact, I think one, Mrs. Gomez, I think she was a state teacher of the year that year or something. So that was really interesting to be in that class for that year at that time.
Mhm.
So it's like all the stars kind of aligned there, which was great.
Okay. And you're coming from Hartford, Connecticut, right? And you're coming to New York City, specifically Queens, specifically
Mhm.
South Ozone Park, right? And I would love to know, if you don't mind, like that couldn't have been like that easy, right? There's an adjustment period and getting used to. So open up a little bit, tell us a little bit more about how that was tough. I can't believe that was like just a slam dunk, right? There was an adjustment period or any hardship around that.
Well, yeah. Just truth be told, when you're growing up, so where I lived in, like I said, Enfield, Connecticut, a suburb of Hartford, very sheltered place. You have it's a town of 50,000 people. You have the movie theater. I like to joke that it had maybe like 7 or 8 traffic lights in the entire town. It was a very small town, especially compared to any section of Queens or whatnot.
Mhm.
So you're very sheltered, and you can basically leave your front door open if you really wanted to at the time. It was that level of safe. You can leave your bike anywhere; it's not going to get stolen. That sort of thing. So to come to Queens, and yeah, we lived in a relatively nice part of South Ozone Park. I guess south of Rockaway Boulevard. That's kind of like the nicer section. I actually drove through there with my wife over the Christmas holiday just briefly last year, and it's still, yeah, pretty pristine. And it's a very nice area. But as far as like, just you go like a couple blocks away from there and suddenly, yeah, you got to lock your bike wherever you go. You need to just kind of be a lot more street smart.
Mhm.
So I think just that eighth grade year taught me to be a lot more street smart, and just learning the New York, I guess, lingo, if you will, versus the Connecticut lingo, and I'm sure it's changed by now, but just learning how to kind of assimilate to different social situations. That was definitely a challenge, especially when you come in, OLPH was, I think, what was it, kindergarten to eighth grade, or it might have been preschool to eighth grade. I can't remember for sure, but
Mhm.
by eighth grade, those guys had all known each other since, kindergarten, first grade. And it's
Mhm.
kind of come in as an eighth grader when all those cliques are established. That was a very difficult thing to kind of
Mhm.
deal with. But I also knew too, I'm going to be going to high school next year. I'm going to meet a lot more new people anyway, and it all kind of worked out.
Sure. And going to a Catholic school, and at that time, that your religion was Hinduism at the time. They were Hindu.
It's
It
still, yeah, it's
still is,
still
obviously.
is.
But I'm just wondering how that was going to a Catholic school, but not being Catholic, because that's not uncommon, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about that perspective.
Yeah, sure. It was new. It was a challenge. I had never been around. So obviously, we're living in Connecticut. There were a lot of like Catholics and other Christians, around. It was probably, in fact, predominant, like probably 90, 95%. But obviously, religion is not taught in public school there. So, you're not exposed to it. So to be exposed to it, just in your face, kind of like that in eighth grade, and then mandatory, you're going to church, and yeah, you're just kind of like standing in the corner while everyone's doing their thing there. But
Mhm.
it was very eye opening. It's like, okay, I'm learning a very different culture at the same time while still staying loyal to my own.
Mhm.
Um, I wouldn't even say it was really complicated. I think most of the people there respected that. Most of the teachers and administrators respected, hey, you're a non-Catholic, but you're showing respect to our religion. And like I said, that carried forward into being able to go to Malloy. I don't think at Malloy religion was pushed upon the students as much as it was at OLPH, but at the same time, it was a Catholic school, and you had to kind of toe the line there a little bit. And I think that year at OLPH really helped facilitate that, because then Fordham, which is also a Catholic college, ended up going there, and Boston College is another Catholic school. So it was all in all 10 years of Catholic school that all kind of materialized from that one year at OLPH.
Okay. And refresh my memory a little bit about where you lived in South Ozone Park. That's a little hazy because we talked about like there's a Lefferts Boulevard separated
Yes.
kind of sort of, there's Rockaway Boulevard, right? And there's these other ways to identify the city and the area. So where did you live? Refresh my memory.
Yeah, so we were over by 122nd Street. That was between 135th and 149th Avenue, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Between 135th and 149th, or I could
Yeah,
place
so
that.
the avenues kind of jumped there a little bit. So yeah,
I could place that. I could place that between 135th and 149th. I got you there. And then what street was it?
122nd.
122nd. Okay, so you were on different side of Lefferts than me.
We were literally 2 or 3 blocks. I think it was 2.5 blocks away from the park over there at the conduit.
Sure, sure. That's
Yeah,
actually I was there not too long ago. I took a picture of the park. I'm probably gonna
really.
put it on Facebook. Yeah, it's actually nicer than when we lived there. It's a really nice. They really fixed it up a lot, and there's
Yeah.
it's still going strong. So did you used to go there to play basketball at the
At
one of
first, yeah, but
the
then at first, yes, but then we found, the guys I played basketball with and whatnot. We found that there was better competition down by 130th Street in Conduit. There's another park there, and there were guys there that were taking off from the free throw line and dunking and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It's like, oh, that's where I want to go play.
Wow. All right. So you're talking a little bit
Yeah,
of trash about the conduit and the conduit park at 122nd area. That wasn't as strong as the other park on 100th. Talking a little bit of smack right there for people who used to play at conduit and so 120. So what? Tell me about that because like we used to think we were pretty good at conduit 122nd, but this other one was
well, like I said,
130.
when you guys, when all of you, Catholic school
Oh,
guys
you're
were
gonna
there,
walk
yeah,
it. You're gonna walk that back a little bit now. The little
well,
smack
I'm
talk.
walking it back a little bit. Yeah, obviously, I should probably qualify that. When you guys were there, obviously, those were some great games. But yeah, outside of that, the better games were 8 blocks away. And
Okay.
I know my
I didn't
parents
know
weren't really
that. I
my
didn't
parents
know
weren't.
that. That's
You
why I
didn't know that?
wasn't there. Otherwise, I would have been there.
Yeah, I should have spread the word. My parents weren't really cool about me going down there all the time, but then I think they drove by a few times and saw that it was okay. And it's like, all right, you know,
Well, that wasn't Lincoln Park though. That was 130th, and so 130th and Ward Avenue was the
in
second one.
Conduit. It might
Oh,
have been 130. It might have been 131st. Yeah.
that was also on Conduit, right? So that's
Yes.
okay. So it's
Yes.
closer to the Van Wyck, where the Van Wyck.
Yes. Closer to Van Wyck. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All
Yes.
right. So the runs were better there, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those games were like track meets.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, so that'd get me in shape when
I
I finish
learned
high
something
school.
today. In addition to some accounting information, I learned a little bit about the geography, and those places are still going strong. I wonder how it is these days between the competition between those two locations with basketball. I do.
I'd love to go there and watch because I don't even think I could touch the backboard anymore.
I'll have to talk about that a little bit too, as times have changed, right? I feel like, and we could tie that into the AI and some trends in accounting, right? Where like
Mhm.
back then, I mean, we were outdoors, right? There was a lot of interaction. There was a lot of, I mean, we were that generation. We weren't really behind computers at all. I don't think there were computers back then. There was no email. So that was 1990, probably 1990-ish. So around then, right?
So yeah,
1990.
I was in high school from '94 to '98. I know you were a couple years ahead of me,
Right.
but so yeah, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was no viral, there was none of that type of stuff. Um, and yet it wasn't boring either because there was just so much to do, especially in the city. You know, I'll admit that like when I was living in Connecticut, things would get a little boring at times, especially if people were traveling out of town. But New York, I was never bored. It was just if there wasn't basketball, there was just some kind of gathering somewhere with people doing anything. And yeah, with no AI, obviously, none of that type of stuff. I mean, we were drinking water out of the faucet. I don't even know if people do that anymore there because everyone's doing the whole bottled water thing, and that's actually still an adjustment for me too. But yeah, no, you had your Walkman, you had your tape recorder. You'd go down to the park, you'd play, you'd go get a soda or something after. And I feel like people interacted more than now. It's interesting, yeah, because now with social media, I feel like people they don't really get together as much. Maybe it's me just having been working in my own business for over 10 years. Maybe I haven't gotten out and seen how it is now, but from what I've seen, I don't think people will really get together as much anymore.
Mhm. Okay. What was your first computer?
My first computer. So we had the family computer. Oh God, I can't even remember which brand it was, but it had all the whole Lotus 123, the Word Perfect, and all that. My first computer, honestly, when I lived in Boston, I had to have my own computer, so I just bought a very cheap, I think it was a Dell desktop, and just kind of ran with that for a few years. And then everybody started getting laptops after that, and I've been just doing the whole Dell laptop things. Again, I'm not being paid by Dell or anything, but
All
that's kind
right,
of been my go-to.
got it. So that Dell desktop, right? So that was your first real PC.
I would say so, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and probably 2002, 2003.
2002, 2003. So basically before then you operated without
Just
your
the family computer or whatever computers were on campus, Fordham, and to a lesser extent Malloy. But the family computer was one that I had pretty good access to.
okay. And email. So when we were growing up, there was no such thing as email, right? I feel like email came in like the early 90s, but correct me if I'm wrong. And in terms of being more widespread, and it might have been in the government in late 80s or even before that. But what about like a kind of mainstream? I feel like that wasn't until maybe 1993, 94. But you tell me the way you remember it. So we grew up without email, at least at a younger age, right?
Yeah, it wasn't around. I never had an email account personally until '98.
Mhm.
Um, but it's actually funny you mentioned that with the government and how email was actually available way before it was available for the public. So my wife's parents were computer programmers, and they did a lot of government contracting work, helping governments get set up with, you know, computer and internet type things. I believe in the '80s, and they had email and all that stuff. So that was something that just only very few people had access to in the '80s, early '90s. I first heard of AOL in '94. I was like, oh, I don't know anything about that. I'm busy with school and basketball and all this other stuff. So whatever. And then I kind of saw 95, 96, 97, more and more people were talking about it. And then when I got to Fordham in August of 1998, you had to have an email account. It's
Mhm.
like, whoa, okay. So at first I was using the one that was on my parents' desktop, and then we took a computer class and they showed us how to set up a Yahoo account. So just kind of did that, and yeah, just went from there.
Yeah, I remember. So Fordham, I was a freshman in '96, and
Right.
I hadn't interacted with the internet at all until going to Fordham. I don't think I had a connection because I didn't know how to navigate that. That was. That was AOL day. I remember there's an AOL dial-up. There was, I think, Netscape, if that was maybe the browser.
Netscape. I remember
Yeah,
Netscape.
that
Yeah.
was the browser, and I was like, "Oh shoot, I'm in college now, and I have to go on the internet." But there's something I think about our generation that I think we're maybe hardwired a little bit differently because we also have like our brain also knows how to think outside of the way the computer guides us to, right? I mean, the computer can be a tool, but could also turn us into tools if we're not careful. So I feel like
Mhm.
we have that ability to kind of go tap into this other part where maybe people that never always had computers don't have that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a very simple example of that. How many phone numbers does the average person memorize anymore? Because everything is right there in your address book on your iPhone or whatnot.
Mhm.
I still obviously try to remember, very crucial ones, but it's not really something you have to do anymore. You don't have to carry a little card in your wallet with everyone's phone number. It's all just right there. So we're very dependent on it. Absolutely.
Okay.
And yeah, like you said, I think certain skills do kind of go away. It's like I don't even know. I have no idea if they even teach cursive writing anymore in school because I don't even know if there's much of a need for it once you get into the real world. You're really just doing a lot of typing. I know kids never used to take typing class seriously in junior high and high school, and now it's like if you didn't do that, you're kind of in trouble if you didn't like pick it up.
Do you remember your computer teacher from Malloy, the name of your computer teacher?
Yes, Dombrowski.
Okay, I had Jennings.
Yeah, I knew Jennings. Yeah.
I wasn't the best typer. I was kind of maybe average, but turned out that I had to learn that as I progressed to because it was quite useful in corporate America. But,
Yeah, it's one of those things too. I found that like you learn it. Obviously, I learned it. That's probably a good. I learned the majority of it in that class, but I had some typing in seventh grade as well in Connecticut. But the yeah, you learn it trial by fire when you have to write a report. Especially at Malloy, they make you do some of those book reports and whatnot. And yeah, I just sat down one day and just took what I learned in typing class and started getting really fast at it. And yeah, right now I think it's honestly more important to know that than to even write in some cases.
sure. So I'd love to do a little exercise here. I'm going to talk about the recruiting profession just for a moment, and I would
Sure.
love once I do that, I would love for you to kind of tell a similar story about the accounting profession. So what I mean by that is, so in recruiting, there was when email, and I wasn't a recruiter in the 90s, but I heard a lot about it. When email came out,
Mhm.
especially, it was a threat to recruiters because
Mhm.
that was a lot of recruiters felt that that would render them useless because that now there was a quick way to communicate. So using the phone wasn't as important, right? Or going on Clive visits wasn't as important, or having a messenger on retainer, someone who runs around Manhattan with resumes. So it was changing so rapidly when email came that there was a lot of panic. Again, I wasn't in the profession yet, but I've heard a lot about it. And then late 90s with tech.com and the whole boom and everything, you have Amazon, I think at the time, Hot Jobs, Yahoo Hot Jobs,
Yeah.
Amazon Monster came out, monster.com. So we're thinking about the late 90s. Then it was like, all right, there's no need for recruiters anymore because you got monster.com, which is a job board, and you had Yahoo Hot Jobs. So like no recruiters unnecessary, right? So that was just in the 90s alone. Not to mention when LinkedIn came around and here we are 20 and now we have AI. 20, recruiting has stood pretty tall for those decades. There's plenty of
Mhm.
recruiters making very nice livelihoods. So it's there's recruiters for every profession and every
Right.
industry, every level. It's a very robust sector. So there's this whole thing of oh shoot, technology's coming. Whether it's email, whether it's job boards, LinkedIn, AI, and there's this kind of anxiety around that. So that's the recruiting kind of narrative I'm giving there. Can you tell a similar one in the accounting profession of how it's been maybe since the 90s to now when it comes to tech and how it's affected jobs?
Sure. So, obviously before computers were widespread, I'll go back to the early 90s. I was still obviously in, elementary school, junior high school, whatnot. People were using 8-column papers instead of Excel. So you would write down, like, think of a typical Excel schedule today. Everything was all manual. So you had to go foot and tie and, you know, crossfoot, whatnot, you have to do everything by hand. So if one thing goes wrong, you have to go back through the entire 8 column again. And obviously that's very time consuming. So when Excel came out and everyone started auditing with the computer and work papers were all done in Excel and Word and whatnot, you could make the argument that that was going to put accountants out of work. Instead, what it did was it kind of pivoted. You can now do more work in less time because of these tools. So it didn't really put accountants out of work. And then obviously when more regulations came out, as I mentioned earlier, Sarbanes-Oxley, because of the whole Enron and WorldCom situation of the early 2000s, there was actually a shortage of accountants, and then people had to go out and hire. And then those new accountants that came in right away, they didn't know anything about 8 columns. I was one of them. I never worked with 8 column paper or, having to use an adding machine or any of that type of stuff. Everything was just on the computer. So I feel like it created a lot of efficiencies. And as you said, like just like with the recruiting profession today, the accounting profession I feel is going very strong.
Okay.
Strongly.
Let's talk about Enron a little bit. I think I saw a documentary. I mean, obviously I lived through it, but we could talk a bit about that. But then the documentary, I think it was called "The Smartest Guys in the Room." Did you ever see that one on Netflix?
I haven't seen it, but yeah, I've heard about it, and I think I know the Enron thing fairly well. I have never really like looked at it up close, but enough to basically pass my interviews for the Big Four at the time. I knew enough about it. What that was it was basically as I mentioned before, you have the balance sheet, the P&L, the statement of cash flows, the statement of equity for any company, and I from what I understand was happening at the time there was a lot of debt, that Enron had, but they were taking that debt from the balance sheet and they were creating these special purpose entities and they were basically hiding the debt there.
Mhm.
So the thing with accounting is you can get away with, crooked accounting for a while, but eventually the truth's going to come out.
Mhm.
And that's basically in a nutshell what happened. And that's where like the whole company got taken down. Arthur Anderson was their auditor and the government took them down along with it. So that's the Enron situation in a New York minute there.
Yep. I appreciate that. And I love that New York minute. That's very, very concise. So definitely summarizing things very well. So it's very useful and quick. Moving nice.
Thank you.
We're moving fast. I love it. We're moving very efficiently through this. We're packing in a lot of value here. So
Oh,
good.
bring it on. Bring it on.
So let's talk about Enron a little bit more because I feel like there was similar to how like technology sometimes causes like, anxiety or panic, or it might also be some of it is not necessarily unintentional with when it comes to marketing or whatever else. But same thing that happened with Enron. So like all of a sudden there was a lot of stress, anxiety in the industry because of this miss. Arthur Anderson did not catch the errors or the fraud at Enron. And it caused a pretty strong reaction. There were maybe one or two other companies. WorldCom, I think, was a company that also had a similar situation. And
Yep.
all of a sudden, it was like a huge government reaction to it, right? When it came to a bill called Sarbanes-Oxley and so on. So I was remembering how it was like very dramatic. It was in the headlines all the time. You had Enron, WorldCom. I'm forgetting there were one or two others, but I was at Deloitte at the time, so I remember it happening.
Right.
And all right, let the government come in and have all these bills and regulations, and now you have to hire all these accountants because of these few instances where there were misses, right? So I'm thinking about that, but then a few years later, like the hedge funds and like this, I don't know, 2007, 2008, despite all these new regulations that have been introduced through Sarbanes-Oxley, the same thing happened again. That there was a complete meltdown of real estate subprime mortgages. So we're living through the whole Enron years, and then the hedge fund. Well, actually, more bank. It was more, pardon me. It was more banks that was going on at with the subprimes and the so I'm just thinking about how accounting, when you're looking at the Enron years and then the subprime meltdown with the banks and the government's involvement or lack thereof. So I'll throw that to you because it's big, oh shoot, the government will come in and will put these regulations, put these laws, and everything will be very safe now. But living through that decade, it seemed like there were still a lot of misses, and maybe we'll dive a little bit deeper into that and how the regulations and taxes come in. But I'll throw it to you. What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Well, the first thing I want to say is us Gen Xers have been screwed. We've lived through the Gulf War. We lived through 9/11 slash Enron and all that. Yeah, like as mentioned, 2008. And yeah, I can definitely kind of talk about that a little bit as far as I guess the 2001 through 2008 bracket there with the Enron all the way up to the real estate crisis. And All I can say is that from what I've read on the Enron situation and Arthur Anderson getting taken down, as you correctly mentioned, the government stepped in.
Mhm.
Um, what's the right way to say this? I don't know if it's Enron. I'm sorry, Arthur Anderson missing things with the Enron situation, or kind of like la 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 la. Didn't want to find certain things, up
Mhm.
to and including the allegation that there were shredded documents in the Anderson Houston office and all that type of stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it was a mess
Mhm.
basically, and as I mentioned, it created SOX, and I feel like it got the profession, I want to say, on the right track. There was SOX was a lot when it first came out. Like the government, that's also something, as you mentioned, that it was a government regulation. I think it was Senators Sarbanes and Oxley
Mhm.
that signed the bill or introduced the bill, and I guess it was ratified by the government, and it was a lot of work. I mean, I don't know if you were still with Deloitte in 2004, 2005, but it was a lot of work. You're doing walkthroughs of all these different processes, an
Mhm.
extensive amount of testing, and then you have to do the audit work on top of that. So the government threw a lot at us, but it was good. It helped get things a little stable.
Mhm.
The 2008 crash, I think that was more just, I feel like that was a separate situation. That was more just banks
Mhm.
giving out all kinds of crazy loans. Like the manager at Burger King was getting a $700,000 loan to buy a house. It's like, and just writing down whatever on the loan application. So it was a very strange time. I was working in banking during that decade and saw all sorts of things as an auditor. And I'm like, oh my God,
Mhm.
um, this is bad, and this is not going to end well. And then I remember where I was working at it's now Amaran Bank, but it was Mercantile Commerce Bank at the time in Miami in 2008. And I remember where I sat in the internal audit department there. We were sitting next to the Treasury Ops, the back office for the trading floor, basically, that
Mhm.
put through all the trades and did all the settlements and all that. And I just heard the settlement guy kind of just say, just nonchalantly, "Oh shit, the market's tanking."
Mhm.
Just like that. And I think it went down like 700 points or something that day, something crazy. And it
Mhm.
was just like, oh, here we go. And
Mhm.
again, I think after that, when it came to like banks and their lending practices, I know a lot of it had to do with government intervention and truth in lending and all sorts of regulations that came out from a compliance standpoint in the banking world. It became super difficult to get a mortgage. It went from just writing down whatever you want on the loan application to these guys checking what you had for breakfast 4 weeks ago, before they fund your loan.
Yeah, and I feel like big picture when it comes to the accounting profession and specifically auditors and maybe before I get to the next question, maybe tell us what's the difference between audit and taxes because that's I guess an important subject there. What's audit and what's tax? And then I have a question on audit.
Yeah. So if you're talking about like internal, external audit, that's either a CPA firm on the external side or a group within a company on the internal side that reports directly to the board of directors, coming in and verifying the financials to provide reasonable assurance that they're accurate. They're not guaranteeing 100% accuracy, but they'll do certain tests. For example, they'll take like let's say you have. I'll use a simple example: cash in the bank. They'll let's say some audit programs will have 100% testing for cash. They'll just take all of the bank recs, which will include the bank statements and whatnot, and tie them against the general ledger, the GL, if you will,
Mhm.
and just determine if there are any reconciling items that warrant an adjustment.
Mhm.
When I say adjustment to the financials because something was wrong.
Mhm.
When we're talking taxes, obviously a totally different animal. That's obviously everybody. Two things guaranteed in life: death and taxes. Taxes being just you know different taxing jurisdictions, whether it's federal, state, city, all saying, hey, you owe this much, this percentage of your income, and you have to kind of. A lot of times, a lot of these big companies will have like tax teams that'll kind of go in, look at the different rates for each jurisdiction, and determine
Mhm.
what's needed and what's not needed as far as filing.
Okay. So appreciate that audit and tax and so within audit, right? So going back to the Enron years and going back to subprime meltdown with the banks, I guess I'd be curious about the auditors are supposed to catch these things, right? And I feel like the smartest guys in the room. I think it was that documentary that I watched where it go. Oh, these people that are doing these trades at Enron, these complex weather derivatives or energy trades. Oh, they're so smart that we as the auditors or we as the general public don't like we can't figure out because they're just so incredibly smart. Meanwhile, it's just another way to steal, right? And I feel the same thing with the real estate. It was always like, oh, it's these the way they're tranching, the way that it's collateralized, and the P&L. And then you convince a lot of auditors, even, and not the great ones, but an average or below average auditor, or just a common person. Oh, like that must be so brilliant what they're doing, and there must be so much value that I can't understand it. I feel like auditors, when they're doing a job very, very well, they should be able to catch what Enron was doing or what Lehman Brothers was doing. I mean, these were straight thieves, right? And tell me a little bit more about that because that was kind of what caused concern. Oh, shoot, the auditors aren't catching this. In fact, when I was at Deloitte, I remember I was auditing the city of New York. So I had a government client at Deloitte. We were in 1 Center Street or 100 Center Street, one of those buildings. We had a big audit room set up, right, for months at a time. It was around the time of Enron and WorldCom in 2000. That was probably, I think that was probably 2002. That was probably 2002. Yeah,
Yeah, I might have my years kind of
that
blurred
was
there.
probably 2002. So yeah, that
Yeah.
because I remember people I came out of college with, they were working at Anderson, Arthur Anderson, they all lost their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Pretty.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So going back to the experience at Deloitte, we had this big audit room, and I don't know, probably 20 of us there every day. One morning we came in, and it was on the 16th, I don't know, 16th floor, and there was graffiti all over the audit room door, and it was
Well,
yeah, and there was other saying who's watching the watchers was what they had been. It was forget what exactly, but the thing is, where these auditors, like, who's watching them, right? So there's a lot of, I thought that was an interesting moment where who's watching the watchers, because you have auditors who are hopefully going to catch what Enron's doing or what Lehman Brothers is doing. And when that doesn't happen, it definitely causes distrust in general public where, oh, it's just these are just more thieves. And how do the auditors not catch them? So it's kind of humbling to get that, whatever it was, the graffiti or no, we weren't involved. I mean, Deloitte was actually number one and stayed number one. I think is still number one overall for sure.
I believe so.
But
Yeah.
to kind of be attached, to Arthur Anderson at the time or the accounting profession. So talk to me about watching the watchers, right? Because you're obviously your firm is with you have well credentialed with the PCAOB, right? You have licenses, certifications. But what if somebody's listening like, oh, like Ravi's not going to catch it if there's like an Enron type trade, even if it's not at a big company, right?
We'll
Even
catch it. Believe you me, with the team that I have and me, and we have Bob Kelly, an ex PwC global partner, as our managing director.
okay.
Working with Devin and I at the management level, along with our team. We have like so many levels of review. We'll catch everything.
Okay.
Um,
So
but
you would have caught Enron. You think you would have caught Enron if you were on that?
so I'll say
If you were the lead partner, if you were the managing partner on that account, right? At Enron, you were the lead client service partner servicing Enron and obviously working at Arthur Anderson as the auditor. You think you would have caught what they were doing?
so. Let me say this. I was not privy to the actual audit procedures that they utilized, or I guess didn't utilize. But so I'll give you the best way I can answer that is with an example. So we have a client, and they're not an audit client; they're an actual they're a publicly traded company where they're outsourced accounting department. We have been for the last several years, and they have their auditor, one of the big ones, coming in every year, every quarter actually, but every year, especially to do the audit, and they have a very complex. It's in the fintech industry, so they have a very complex revenue recognition situation, where you can only really see the transactions in real time, or you have to have one of the ops people kind of go in and recreate just to show how that revenue was captured. And similar situation, it's super complex. If you're an auditor, at least before the PCOB was established and whatnot, you may just say, okay, we'll look at a couple, and if everything seems to be okay, we'll just sign off on it, that sort of thing. What's happening now is the auditor, that top firm that comes in and audits it, we all kind of get on a Teams call, and we all watch as the ops person is showing us, okay, this is coming in, this is how it's being booked, these are the principles, the accounting principles. I won't get into ASC 606 or anything, that's probably not for this discussion, but making sure that the revenue recognition standards are being met, and they don't leave until they're comfortable with how this whole process is working. And then there's all sorts of narratives, process narratives and whatnot, that document what was being shown, what was being done. it's really just a matter of bringing out the right people, the right experts to test something. If an Arthur Andersen does not understand an Enron's transactions, they shouldn't be taking the engagement. But if they have some level of understanding, they need to get comfortable with what's going on. They need to be comfortable with what's being booked.
Okay. So allow me to rephrase. So as a CEO, right, you're chief executive officer, right? You're the number one guy at your firm, right? So what if your firm, I'm going to change the question, not if you were Arthur Anderson at the time, what if your firm, under this hypothetical, was in there? Would you have caught what they were doing?
Using that approach that these bigger firms are using
No,
now, yeah.
using your firm's approach. So
Well, yeah. So our firm's approach would mirror like what some of the big guys are doing. Just to kind of talk a little bit about Ravi Ramnarain CPA LLC, we're a 14-man firm. 13 of our 14 people, well, all 14 of us are STEM professionals. From myself and Devin throughout the entire organization, and then 13 of the 14 of us are either CPAs or chartered accountants, and we don't take anybody who has less than 10 years of experience. So we have a very, very strong team. And when we do need more people for bigger projects, we kind of draw on our network of chartered accountants. We're actually very well known in New Delhi, India, and we have access to some of the best chartered accountants that city has to offer. So we're very fortunate in that case. But as far as our firm, we mirror what the bigger firms are now doing, as far as just again utilizing what we know about the accounting standards and dissecting it and just making sure that we're able to explain, to a PCAOB or a peer reviewer or some third party regulator coming in and looking at our work papers that we knew what we were doing.
Okay. I want to continue to kick this one down around a little bit because I'm trying
Sure.
to understand, like, even like as a client, right? Like there's almost like a conflict of interest when you have an Arthur Anderson and an Enron or other situations where you have an outside accounting firm performing the audit for that. But then that very firm, Enron's the one that's paying Arthur Anderson to give sign off. So tell me about the perceived conflict of interest where, oh, okay, we're just going to pay this firm, they're going to give us a stamp of approval.
Right.
I have an idea what the issue, but there's some skepticism there. But the client kind of ran into that in the subprime meltdown was that Moody's and Standard and Poor's and ratings agencies were the signing off A plus on everything because Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns were paying them to. So like I could see how a skeptic would say, "Oh my gosh, like these Enron is paying Anderson. Of course, Anderson's going to do whatever the heck Enron wants him to. Oh, of course, Moody's is getting paid by Lehman. I don't know if they were or weren't, but the idea is, oh, of course, Moody's going to give them an A plus on their credit rating. So
Right.
get me over my skepticism, or maybe some listeners who were like, yeah, of course, Ravi's firm, they have a client, and the client's paying Ravi, so Ravi's just going to sign off and get paid by the client, right? So walk, convince me that that's not the case.
Yeah. So in today's world, first of all, let me walk it back a little bit. Like if the government were to take over and do audits instead of like firms like ours or the big four or the top 50, top 100, I think it'll be a complete mess. I don't know if that infrastructure would exist for the government to come in and just do an audit. But I think to more directly answer your question, it's more about reputation and licensing. And nowadays, like, signing off on public company financials that are, not accurate, that are grossly, misrepresenting the company's true financial picture, you go to jail. That includes the CEO, the CFO, the lead partner, possibly others, could lose their licenses, things like that. So while you are 100% correct, the client is paying the audit firm for their opinion. There's no opinion shopping going on. At least I don't think there is for the most part. Um, there's still a certain level of ethics. Every CPA, obviously has to do their CPs every year, and part of that includes 4 hours of ethics. And the CPA societies are very quick. The CPA regulators, I should say. So you have a state CPA society basically in every state, and then you have the business, like a Department of Business and Professional Regulation, like we do here in Florida, where your license is kind of housed, if you will. And yeah, they'll, if there are any ethics violations or things like that, they'll suspend you or disbar you pretty quickly. So it's there's a vested interest for people to not do anything nefarious. And as I alluded to before, especially when you're doing public company audits, you have the PCAOB looking at your work. You have mandatory peer review, if you're doing, any attestation work at all. And just general reputation, especially as you mentioned, LinkedIn and things like that, your reputation can go into the toilet very quickly if you sign off on something that's nefarious or that you have reason to believe is not accurate.
Okay. So going toggling to 2009-ish, right? So we're talking about Lehman, Bear Stearns, Merrill, and so on. I don't remember people going to jail. Now it sounds like things have changed, and now it's a little bit more scrutinized. But I mean that was like the heist of all heists. I mean, did any of those guys go to jail? I mean, these banks crumbled. I don't think any of them did, and maybe they just got litigated, they got a slap on the wrist. But we're talking like when as class warfare sometimes ensues in our country, other countries, sometimes like the biggest robbers get away with the biggest crimes, and then somebody who steals I don't know, a TV or a car, they're in jail for 10 years. But
Right.
these guys steal like billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they don't go to jail. Tell me people went to jail in 2009, or maybe I'm wrong. You tell me.
So, like I said, the Enron WorldCom stuff, I think that was a little different than the Lehman Brothers stuff.
Mhm.
Um, Again, I think I don't know if the 2008 2009 stuff should have resulted in any jail time. And to my knowledge, I'm in the same boat as you. I don't can't think of anyone off the top of my head that
Mhm.
went to jail. But I will say that there was basically these banks. So what happened in 2008, 2009 with these Lehman Brothers and whatnot, a lot of these banks, because of the number of subprime loans that they would go and then go ahead and, collateralize and sell, to, different governments, to the bigger banks, whatever. I think the bigger banks would underwrite them. And when people stopped paying their mortgages, the values of those securities just, went into the toilet.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if it's more just criminal activity or just very bad business practices. You're not going to go to jail for bad business practices, usually, I guess. But in this situation, yeah, it wasn't as egregious as the Enron, where they're shredding documents and, hiding debt, and WorldCom, where I think something similar was going on. I think obviously people went to jail for the Enron and the WorldCom. I think there was a guy, I can't remember his name, Ebers, I think his name was. He was one of the guys that went to jail during that time. But as far as the Lehman stuff, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a different animal. It just dealt with, banks having very lax standards, and it came to basically bite everybody in the ass.
Right. And if there wasn't a bailout by the kind of, we'll say, lower class or middle class taxpayers in the US, all of those banks would have been gone forever, including Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. We wouldn't hear the names at all, right? They were cooked. It was just a bailout by the lower middle class, correct? That's why I remember it, because there was no chance of them surviving. It was all crony deals that allowed them to still be around. Tell me I'm wrong.
I I can't tell you you're wrong.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's talk about jail a little bit. So like when we talk about jail, like what's like a pretty high profile case in accounting where somebody ended up in jail, like for whatever it might be, fraud, abuse. You tell me where, hey, this is kind of a well-known case where this person's doing jail time.
An accountant doing jail time. To be very honest, I can't think of one from a recent standpoint, because the funny thing is, like, there will be a lot of like examinations, as I mentioned. The PCOB will come in, peer review, and a lot of times the PCAOB will come in, and there'll be kind of you know a fine, that's levied, for something that wasn't right. And let's say a work paper, or somebody was going in and changing work papers, before a PCAOB review. And I don't remember anybody going to jail over that. Worst case, you'll have like a restatement, an audit restatement, or something of that nature. And even that's pretty rare. A lot of times it's fines. I'd really have to go back and see,
Sure.
just anybody that's gone to jail. But it is a threat, and it is something that, not only audit partners, but CEOs and CFOs are very, just
That was more
wondering.
allow me to rephrase. So what I was not really talking about necessarily the accountants, meaning like the CPAs, the like external like service providers. I was thinking like maybe somebody as a small business owner, or mid-size, who goes, or even a large company that's a CFO or CEO that ends up in prison for like stealing massive amounts of money through fraud or abuse. Like so, it could be any type of scandal or any type of to share with me. I've seen some founders go to prison, right? Who runs kind of like Ponzi schemes of sorts, and they're more entrepreneurs. So, but let's go a little broader with let's call it financial fraud. I'm not so talking about accountants going to jail, but give me some like high profile stuff where people ended up in prison. Because it wouldn't be jail unless they were prison for financial fraud.
Well, obviously, the first one that would come to mind in that case would be, the Bernie Madoffs of the world.
Mhm.
I think a lot of that too had to deal, as you correctly mentioned, the Ponzi scheme. Just for the audience that not doesn't exactly know what that means, it's like basically you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and literally just kind of kicking the can down the road, showing these great returns, but those great returns are paid for with future investors' money, and then those quote unquote future investors, are getting paid from future investors, and eventually somebody gets screwed.
Mhm.
So obviously he went to jail, and I believe he's dead now. But he went to jail for basically the rest of his life
Mhm.
once he got caught. But one thing that's interesting about that story, from what I've read about it, is the auditor. I think he was using an auditor that he was. I don't even know if that auditor had any other clients besides him, and they were just signing off on whatever it is he was doing.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that auditor faced some sort of penalty as well.
Mhm.
But that's another situation where the public really relies on what an auditor is doing, whether you're auditing a public company or a private company. You're as a CPA, your job is to protect the public, and I don't think that was being done in that case.
Okay. Let's talk about Ponzi schemes a little bit because it does bring back a memory. I was taken by a Ponzi scheme freshman year at Malloy. I remember that. There were, yes, yeah, $5. I lost $5, but I was convinced
The
by
money back then,
we got to go after them. I could hire you and we could track them down. Interest and penalties at this point. I mean, that's a complete windfall for me after 30, 40 years. That $5 could have appreciated quite a bit. But I remember vividly, I got taken by it was called pyramid at that time. It was a pyramid scheme where I was like, if
Okay.
you gave $5 to a senior and you yourself that had to collect $5 from five other freshmen or whatever it was, and they kind of sold it to me. I was also a year younger, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
so I was like, it was a little intimidating. But, oh, here, give us $5, and here's how you're going to recoup 25 from five other people. So I just gave them the $5. But anyway, so I was taken by a Ponzi scheme. So how do people watch out for that? Because it's the simplest scheme, but very well executed. So how do people watch out for a Ponzi scheme?
Honestly, it's pretty simple. If it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the approach that I've taken. I could talk a little bit about, like, just investment strategies that I again, I'm not a financial planner or anything like that, but if a client asks me, what have you done, what's been your strategy, I can literally just say, we don't, my wife and I, we don't get into anything risky or anything like that. We just kind of live a simple life. We hunker down, and if there's a good opportunity, we research the hell out of it, and then we make absolutely sure that it's legit, and then we decide whether or not to pull the trigger. And I think if someone's just dangling an opportunity, a get rich quick scheme in front of you, it's just not going to work. And you go with that. And when they start getting agitated, when you start asking all these questions about, like, okay, so what's going to be my return and this and that, and if they just keep telling you, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, trust me, bro. um, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Also brings back a memory. This was probably also at Malloy, and in fact, I know it was at Malloy, maybe sophomore year or junior year. There were some of us from South Ozone Park. You remember Mike's Deli over on wherever it was, 135th and 117th, I think. It might still be around,
Yes, yes,
but
yes, yes, yes,
different
yes.
ownership. But I remember we were running parlay tickets out of Mike's Deli to, well, we were like 14 years old, 15 years old. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we would kind of delegate a responsibility to bring these kind of gambling tickets, right? I'm bringing this up because of the NBA scandal that's going on right now, right? But these things that happen, they're nothing new under the sun, right? There's been Ponzi schemes as long as recorded history, I'm guessing, right? And the same thing as these gambling as well, right? So anyway, so we talked to the neighborhood a little bit. I just remember being, oh, here's these tickets. These like to bet football games, basically. We'd bring them, to Malloy. People would fill them out, give us $5. They would basically gamble. We would then bring it back to Mike's Deli at the time, and that was just a thing, right? We didn't think anything of it. We didn't know it was illegal or anything. It was like,
Right,
$5.
your kids, yeah,
We're
yeah,
kids, but freshmen, kids were gambling, right?
yeah.
So these are things that are kind of old as time between Ponzi schemes and gambling. But
Right.
I'm just it's kind of bringing back memories of Malloy, right? And Malloy's a great school, right? Malloy has a
Yes.
stellar reputation. So, but I'm just telling it like it is. This stuff happened, right? Malloy has one of the best reputations. But stuff, these kids are going to be kids, and Ponzi schemes are going to be Ponzi schemes, and gambling is going to be gambling. So, and what's going on with the NBA now? That's when we think of like these these high profile cases of people getting taken, and the comfort of maybe having somebody like, as an auditor or an investigator who's unbiased, who's out there trying to make sure this doesn't happen. So maybe talk about that, like the satisfaction you get from the integrity of your work. So knowing that you're doing business in a very ethical, moral manner, and you're doing what's right for your clients, and also holding standards. How do you go about that? Because it could be a jungle out there, and how do you take pride in your work, and what type of joy do you get from that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of go back a little bit, just to kind of double down on what you were talking about with Malloy before I go really direct and answer your question. It's yeah, I mean, guys were playing. What's that game, that dice game with the three dice, CeeLo, or I don't
See
know if it's
you
still
see
around.
you
Yeah, you see guys playing that, and yeah, cards and all that. Yeah, there was that deli over there. The what was Malloy? I like to joke about Malloy. I was the Hindu guy going to a Catholic school in a Jewish neighborhood, so so there, it was great. It was like everybody was just kind of hanging out, having fun. But people would go over to the deli that was a block away, and you'd see all sorts of like, yeah, like you said, um, games and things like that going around. And yeah, I think it does translate into the adult world. You see a lot of just shady deals. The broke brother-in-law, coming and saying, "Oh, hey, I got this great idea. It's going to make you millions tomorrow," and this and that. And I guess there are some people in my mom's family who kind of think that way too. And I'm not a very popular person at family reunions because I'll call them out, so I don't get invited anymore, which is fine. In fact, that's a compliment that I don't get invited anymore. um, but long story short, yeah, no. As far as like that, and balancing that with my work, a lot of times I'll have a client that'll come to me and saying, hey, they've been scammed, or they lost a lot of money on this or that, or this is my tax situation, from, this year, and I haven't paid my taxes in 4 years. You see everything when you're dealing with the public. You see everything, and your job as the CPA, you're not there to judge. You're there to, correct whatever path that they're on, and you're there to also just be a resource in case, God forbid, they do get audited, or they are dealing with some sort of issue with the bank or whatnot, that you can kind of step in and help explain things. That's something that I take a lot of pride in. And when it comes to our corporate clients as well, a very similar situation on a different level, just making sure that, okay, XYZ client can't afford a CFO. Can they hire us for this many hours to get their SEC filing out the door? But hey, by the way, we had a qualified opinion, from this last audit. Can you help fix our revenue recognition templates? Can you do this? Can you do that? And again, it's just a matter of not being judgmental, and just really taking your training and all of your ethics. That you can't be a CPA without having some sort of ethics, and you just literally take all of that, and help get their ship sailing properly again. And again, just being a resource to them on a go forward basis.
Okay. Let's talk about taxes, right? So that's something we haven't covered yet. And there's a firm, South Florida tax firm, and that's a firm that you
Yes.
also own. So we'd love to talk about taxes a bit. And I mean, we're like, I don't know, we're about an hour and a half in. I think we said we'd go for an hour and a half. Dude, I'm
Sure.
getting so much out of this, though, man. I'm getting a tremendous amount out of this, and like I'm hoping at least one listener does too. So I'd
Yeah.
like to keep going, but
Sure. Yeah. No. The good thing about it's funny because I'm dealing with people in all different time zones and whatnot. Basically 6.5 days a week. I'll take a little bit of time on Saturdays. Most of Saturdays I don't work, but Sunday through Friday it's go go go. So, but the thing is, when you're dealing with time zones in Europe and in India and whatnot, your mornings are pretty packed, but then your afternoons are basically when everyone's sleeping. So it's kind of perfect. It's perfect timing.
this New York Minute thing that you're doing. I mean, you're getting a lot of good stuff in here, and I think people are going to benefit greatly. So I just want to keep going. And
Sure.
all right, well, let's go for until we don't want to go anymore, right? So
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So as far as South Florida tax firm, so it's funny because people ask, why do you own two CPA firms? Why not just combine them? Do you see PwC doing Jackson Hewitt type work or H&R block type work? No, and vice versa. You ask an H&R block person, what the current expected credit losses are. They're going to look at you with a dead fish expression. So it's like we found that with Ravi Ramnarain CPA LLC, I started in 2015. It was I was still working in banking, and uh, I was working at a bank called, like I said, Amaranth Bank. It was a great experience, but I was only going to go this far. They already had a controller, they already had a CFO, and they weren't going anywhere. So I needed to do either leave or just start a side business and just keep doing what I was doing. And then, long story short, I ended up meeting my then fiance, now wife, and she was promoting the business while I also simultaneously, right after, I would say, I met her in June of 2016, and then we actually ended up getting engaged in August 2016, and then she moved to Florida, and then right after she moved to Florida, I got an offer for a CFO position at a Walmart supplier. So it's like, oh God, I got this business now. I'm a CFO of a Walmart supplier. What the hell am I going to do as far as like my work? And now I'm in a new relationship and all this stuff. So it's like, all right. So Devin promoted the business, and by 2018, it grew to the point where I ended up quitting the CFO job and just doing that full time. But I found that we were turning away a lot of tax work, because the business that Devin helped develop with me, there was a lot of corporate accounting work, and it's a very different animal. A lot of times people who are good corporate accountants who know the U.S. GAAP literature from A to Z, the house of GAAP, if you will, for those of you who are accountants listening, they don't know taxes. They don't know anything about taxes. And I was one of those people. Since I had a master's in tax, I knew about both, but I just didn't have the time to do both. And it was hard finding people at the time to do both. So we just stuck with the corporate accounting. Fast forward to 2024, we realized, oh my God, we've turned away so much tax work. We could have easily started a second business and just done this. So we just decided to do that. And South Florida Tax Firm was born last year in June 2024. So we've been going strong for over a year now. We've done a lot of subcontract work for some of the bigger CPA firms, and we take on individual and small business tax and bookkeeping work as well. We have staff with Ravi Ramnarain CPA that sometimes we borrow over and we use for South Florida tax firm. So we're covered on the staffing side. One of our guys he's based in India, but he's a U.S. tax expert. So that's honestly a perfect situation for everybody. So that allows me to kind of go in and, I'll do the more complex work myself, but a lot of times I can just delegate it to my staff, and then I'll just go in and review it. And it's my P10 that's, being tagged to it. So I'll sign off on it. And yeah, it's a great situation.
Okay. So let's talk some taxes. So tax, I mean, it's not necessarily for the general public is not the sexiest topic in the world. So it can sometimes eyes can start to glaze over, ears start to close. Oh, taxes, that sounds boring, right? This sounds really technical. I don't want to talk about taxes. It's an unpleasant thing. Also, people pay taxes that they don't necessarily want to pay, right? It's not. So let's talk tax, right? So with let's talk about individual tax. So this is I mean 1040s, right? And people paying. So I guess what type of service do you provide to somebody who's an individual that is, we'll say, for lack of a better, like the middle class, so to speak, right? And is looking for help. What type of service do you provide to that person who's not themselves a tax expert? They're working, right? And they don't know
Right.
tax code. So what type of service do you provide to somebody like that who's seeking
Yeah.
help?
So if you're talking to somebody who just has a simple, let's say it's a single individual has a W-2 job, so they're getting their W-2 statement at the end of the year every January. Um, it's literally just a situation where, okay, I'll ask for a year or 2 years of their prior tax returns just to kind of see, what they're doing. Are they itemizing? Are they taking the standard deduction? I'll be very, and you know, I'll just be very blunt here. I try to get my clients to take the standard, because when you take the itemized, you better have everything documented. You better know what you're doing, or you're going to get audited. And if you can take the standard, a lot of times, they keep raising the standard deduction every year anyway, especially, if you're married filing joint, why not just take the standard and just not worry about the hassle? But a lot of times, some clients just want to itemize, other times they don't. I highly recommend that you should, if you're a W-2 employee, try to go with the standard. Just send over your W-2, send over your last 2 years tax returns. I'll bang out the return for you, and then I'll just quickly show you what it is you're getting back, or, in some cases, what you owe. So those are pretty straightforward. When you're talking somebody who has LLCs and 1099 income and whatnot, that's where it gets a little hairy. That's where you really dive in, see what it is that, what their actual sources of revenue are, what expenses can legitimately be tied to the business. Sometimes they have the bookkeeping done, sometimes they don't. So obviously, if we have to do the bookkeeping, we'll charge a low hourly fee for that to get that done. relative to other CPA firms, that is. But if they have it done, it's really just a matter of plugging it in the return, sending them the summary, walking them through what, why the software. We use an Intuit software called ProConnect, so we want to show them what ProConnect's kicking out as far as their results and why. And 9 times out of 10, they're cool with it. And then I'll send them the form 8879 to authorize e-filing.
Mhm.
And 8879 also applies to the individual ones as well, individual returns. And then we'll file it in the software. And if I'd say 99% of the time the software will accept it, the 1% of the time that it doesn't, we'll just paper file it, because the IRS sometimes will kick back a return if they feel that, like, somebody, there was like an identity theft situation, they don't have a PIN, or just something like that.
Mhm.
But either way, we make sure that we take care of our clients from A to Z.
Okay. Put your financial therapist hat on for a moment, and let's say somebody has incoming mail from the IRS, right, or for Department of Taxation and of New York State, whatever. And that can be a financial therapist and tell the person who's receiving this, hey, things are going to be, because that could be, shouldn't get mail like that can be a scary thing when you see the IRS, right? Maybe not so much these days anymore, but tell me about the anxiety people feel, or just scared of that they missed something themselves, or they're getting audited, and some of the fear and anxiety around that. So be a financial therapist and talk to me or somebody else who might be in that situation where it's oh, don't worry, things are going to be okay. That it's just a piece of mail, right? Or it's a small error, you'll be fine. So play financial therapist and say, well, we should not be afraid of the big bad IRS.
Yeah. So if you didn't do anything egregious and you get something in the mail, yeah, don't panic. Just kind of read the instructions, see what it says. The good thing about the IRS is they are willing to work with you, as far as payment plans and things like that. If there's an error that you made on a return, let's say I don't know, $3,000, if you don't have $3,000 on you, or $3,000 earmarked for that, they'll work out a payment plan with you depending on your situation. So that's not really something you have to worry about. At the outset, obviously there's going to be penalties and interest and things like that, but you're not going to go to jail or anything like that just for getting a letter. But yeah, don't panic. Just follow the instructions. I'm a little biased because I'm a CPA, so if I received a letter like that, I would just kind of go right into action. But I know a lot of people who are not CPAs may not do that. And obviously, I have a vested interest in saying, contact your CPA. But if you can't afford one or whatnot, just try to call the number, or email, mail them back, and just find out what your options are. A lot of times, I know getting somebody live at the IRS is not the easiest thing in the world, but if you call the number, there's certain hotlines that you can call that will get you to a live agent, and they'll kind of walk you through your steps. In worst case, yeah, you can reach out to South Florida Tax Firm, and we will guide you through, just what the repayment plans are. Or sometimes there are actually things that you can dispute. There are forms you can fill out with the IRS to ask for an abatement, like a one-time abatement. That's something that we do for clients as well for a small fee. So there are options, and you send them the abatement, you may not hear from them again, or they may just go back to you and say, no, not good enough, but at least you're trying to fight it.
Okay. I was just thinking about that. What is it, the Miranda rights, when somebody says if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you, something like that. Is kind of similar to it. Okay? If you can, but the thing about, if you can't afford an accountant and you have something going on, for you to deal directly with the IRS, like, I guess they'll provide help, so to speak, but you're independent of the IRS, so you kind of be maybe a little bit more. I don't know, a little bit more on their side to help them, rather than just calling directly to the IRS. So tell us about the one will be provided for you versus them hiring their own, that dynamic in
Well,
accounting.
it's not so much them, like, I guess, and I want to make sure I'm clear. Like, they're not going to like provide you with an accountant or anything like that, but they have a helpline, and you can call the helpline, and they can work out a payment plan with you. So when I say, if you can't afford a CPA, just call them directly, and they'll work with you.
Okay.
That's one way to do it. But if you want to have your CPA file an abatement, you know, to at least attempt to, extinguish the debt, saying, hey, listen, there were extenuating circumstances, or there was just, XYZ natural disaster, whatever the case may be, because there are things like, for example, here in Florida, like if there's a hurricane and you mail something, and God forbid there was something with the hurricane that, wiped out the entire mailing system or something, and something didn't get to where it needed to be, you can file an abatement, and the IRS will be pretty forgiving, and they
Okay.
have certain relief for certain natural disasters, things like that.
I'm going to ask you for a war story now. So, war story meaning that you got something, let's say you have a brand new client and you're looking at their history, whether it's with a former accountant or they're doing it on their own, where you're like, oh my gosh, this is the biggest disaster I've ever seen. So, I'm calling a war story for that kind of new client where you're like, oh man, this is a mess. How am I going to help them?
So, are you asking for like an example of a
Not
war
then they
story?
just we call him Bob Jones. Like we don't just like
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I
yeah, like a
wouldn't.
client that came your way, where it's like, oh man, I'm getting this person, and they haven't been doing things the right way, or they've had their own
Yeah,
missteps, and there's
yeah.
like all sorts of penalties and fees and everything like that. Like kind of a war story, I'll call it, kind of a real life situation where you're like, oh man, this person's it's going to be well, we'll get them there, but it's going to be a little rough, rough few days or weeks or months until it gets until there's a plan in place to help them.
Yeah, no, we had a client that hadn't filed in 10 years.
Mhm.
Uh, Interesting situation where, suddenly the person wanted to be compliant and catch up on 10 years of filings. The good thing, at least at that time, was the IRS had and has a statute of limitations of 6 years. So we just went ahead and filed the last 6 years.
Mhm.
But we had to just at the time we weren't using the software that we use, so we did it manually,
Mhm.
and literally just going and printing out returns from 6 years prior to the current year. We went and filled everything out with all the information that the person provided us, and literally my advice to the person was overpay, because the thing with penalties and interest, especially for that amount of time, there's no, yeah, the IRS has its tax tables and all that for the different years, but you never know what exactly they're using to calculate what, and you don't know exactly what the actual penalty is going to be on top of what you do owe for those years and interest. So just overpay. And of course, he wasn't too cool with that at first, but then kind of realized, it's better to overpay than to get, as you mentioned, notices in the mail later on saying, hey, you owe this, you owe that. And they're probably not going to come at you saying, oh, here's your one bill for these 6 years that you filed. you know they're going to come year by year and just say, oh, you owe this, oh, you owe that, oh, you owe this, you owe that. And it can be a barrage of mail. So um, I think everything turned out okay, based on the overpayment. Obviously, there were still like some letters that came in the mail as far as things that this person had to still pay up on, because 6 years is a very long time to not file your taxes. You're talking Wesley Snipes type stuff there and whatnot.
Oh
But
man, you led to my next question. You beat me to it. That was gonna be my next question. I was going to say so just to finish up with an example. So somebody for 10 years did not pay taxes, and then but because there's a statute of limitations of 6 years, they were basically kind of able to get away with four of them not paying taxes, right? And but then the other six
yeah,
years they did have to pay.
they did have to pay, yeah. And I feel like the IRS does kind of like take that into account too, when they're assessing the penalties and the interest. So, but
Okay.
yeah, the statute of limitation is
Man, you brought up Wesley Snipes. Good job. We're on the same page. That was going to be my tough question. I got to come up with a tougher one, but I think I have two questions for you. Let's talk about taxes some more. Let's talk about so where and I know you can handle this rigor because we got OLPH and Malloy and Fordham, and you have BC. So like I'm sure you've had healthy debates and you've been challenged in many ways. So I'm going to give you some tough questions now. So
sure.
where in the U.S. Constitution does it say that individuals are required to pay income tax?
Um, I'll be honest, that's not something that I've ever been asked before. I don't know. I don't know where it would say that, to be honest. I know that taxing is up to again, you have your federal, your state, and your in a place like New York City or whatnot, you have city taxes as well. It's really up to the different jurisdictions, outside of the federal level. As far as the constitutional language, I'll be mea culpa. I have no idea.
Okay, all right. So I can throw a tough one. I have to know. So that was a tough one, but
Yeah,
let's stick with this one. So with Wesley Snipes, my understanding with him and others is that they mounted defense saying that there's nothing in the Constitution that requires them to pay income tax. So that the IRS is just some type of kind of rogue agency that operates on its own and has some affiliation with the US government, but it's not actually part of the US government. That's the case they make. They pretty much lose every time. But there's a lot of people that try to make that case saying there's no, where does it say I'm required to pay income tax? But you have this kind of IRS thing Walk me through like how the IRS is affiliated with the government or isn't. Is it an agency? Is it a department? Because that gets a little bit gray, and everybody's paying their taxes, but like, should we be? Like, is it lawful to tax our income? So I guess a few questions there, but basically the main one is like this defense that's mounted that, oh wait, I shouldn't have to pay income tax. There's no law that, and how the IRS is constructed, and maybe a little bit about the history of the IRS if you have that.
Yeah, I mean, high level, IRS would be, part of the Department of Treasury. When you mail your taxes in, you're mailing it to the Department of Treasury, basically, government agency.
Mhm.
I would say, in a nutshell, that they do have the authority to tax us, as citizens of the U.S. I think in the Wesley Snipes situation, they were just grabbing at straws and literally just trying anything to get out of it, because I think he was making something like $13 million a year for
Mhm.
those 6 years that he didn't file. So you do the math there on what the taxes would be for that amount of time.
Mhm.
So that was a pretty egregious case. And I know there was something with an accountant that he was using that was doing something nefarious and wasn't filing and maybe telling them that he was. So I think there were just a bunch of things.
Mhm.
I think some of that case had to do with the jurisdiction that he was in. I think it was a part of Florida called Ocala, Florida. And, just they basically had it in for him, from a high level perspective. But he also screwed up big time too.
Because it's yeah, and I just when I heard about that case and I looked into it more, but a lot of times the response even by judges and like nobody can really find where it says that we're obligated to, but every judge will kind of rule what you just said, that oh yeah, we're obligated to, but nobody could find where it says that. And so my next question is, to my knowledge, and of course for any listeners or viewers, if they have that information of where it says that we're required to pay taxes, I would love to hear it. The other question is more of a philosophical question. So let's just use a generic example, and so just stay with this as hypothetical. Let's say they're single, they're making $100,000 a year, they're straight W-2, right? That they live in New York State. What's going to be their effective federal income tax? Just ballpark. For for an individual, New York State, $100,000 W-2.
So when you say their effective tax, like just federal, state, and city combined, or
No, let's say of the 100,000, how much will go to the federal government?
so ballpark, the highest rate would be 39, 40%. In the case of somebody making 100,000, you're looking at probably 30%, but that's just at the federal level. And then you have your state and then your city. I'd have to look and see what the latest and greatest state and city are for New York, but
Huh?
you could basically chop 30% of your income, just for
Huh?
federal, as a conservative estimate, depending on your situation, because
Yeah.
obviously, everyone's different. There could be different. Two people making 100,000 could end up with a completely different AGI from each other, just based on above the line deductions and whatnot.
Okay. No, thank you. So let's run with that hypothetical a little bit further. So, person's making $100,000. They're single. They live in New York State. They are going to be paying just for this little case study. This is not. They're going to pay $30,000 to the federal government, right? That's
Yeah,
just for this roundabout, right?
yeah, yeah.
The philosophical question is, at what point do you believe that what dollar amount above $30,000 do you believe does a question of morality? Like if it gets to $60,000, like if the federal government's 70, because this is when socialism creeps in, right? 80%. At what point is there like a morality where, oh shoot, that percentage is too high? Because once you get to 100% tax, then you don't have any of the fruits of your own labor, right? That's indentured servitude at best. So what is that kind of threshold of where you're like, hey, like that sounds like that's kind of a morality thing. Like 30%, the government seems to get away with that. And then
Mhm.
that's an example. But when do you like, oh my gosh, that's socialism?
Yeah. So as you mentioned at the outset, my wife is a dietitian. She has a license. She's licensed as a dietitian, RDN, if you will, and both at the federal and state level. So we have a lot of debates about the U.S. versus other countries as far as like medical coverage and whatnot, and university. And I think the U.S. is one of the only developed countries in the world that does not pay for you to go to college and does not pay for you to go to the hospital. Like if you go to I think most countries in Europe, Canada, China, India, a lot of other countries, medical care is like either free or close to free, and it's pretty damn good too. University is very, very cheap. What does Fordham University cost now? Probably what, 40 grand a year, give or take.
I would say probably, believe it or not, a lot more than that, I would say.
Oh my God.
I would venture guess it's a lot more than 40,000 a year to
I was
pay.
thinking just the tuition
Oh, just
alone.
tuition? I'd still probably guess it's more, but maybe that's just tuition. Yeah. Maybe that's,
Yeah, versus if you were like in Germany or something, you'd be paying $3,000 or something like that.
yeah.
But and so where I'm going with that is, in those countries, yeah, you're taxed more than you are in the U.S. Everyone knows that you're taxed more in Europe, you're taxed more in Canada,
Mhm.
and whatnot. But you're getting so much more in return.
Mhm.
One thing I believe the Constitution does say is, taxation without representation is tyranny and whatnot. And I think that's written into the law in some capacity. I have to go back through my old history books and whatnot to see where that is. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to be taxed that amount, you got to be getting something in return.
Okay. So great answer. Let's and interesting to hear like those dinner table conversations, right? When people talk about healthcare and their family or their taxes, their household budgets. So just sticking with that about, I'm just curious. I'm gonna try to pin you down to a number there. Where like at what point like oh my gosh, my client is paying 70% of like do you have like almost like a moral issue where if somebody's paying like an exorbitant 80%? Like where's that threshold where you're like, oh, this is communism almost.
Well, again, if somebody's a W-2, as you mentioned in that example, 100,000, they're not going to be paying any $70,000 in
I know,
taxes.
but a hypothetical, like if the government increased taxes, what would you say about that? What's the threshold where it gets to be just too much, where it's
So there's
unethical?
two things. There's two things there. Tax planning is not a crime. Tax avoidance, I should say, tax avoidance is not a crime. Tax evasion is a crime.
Okay.
So what you do in a situation like that, if there were like egregious hikes to the tax rates and whatnot for whatever jurisdiction you're living in,
Mhm.
the best defense is a good offense. Kind of use a sports analogy there. You're not gonna shut down Michael Jordan, but you can try to outscore him. Type of
Mhm.
thing. So
Okay.
what you do there is, you know, in a situation where, let's say, you have that source of income, but you have like other tax benefits you can do, like for example, contributing more to your 401k,
Mhm.
setting up IRAs, whatever the case may be, just depending on the type of IRA, but just like deferring as many of the taxes as possible.
Mhm.
That's one way to kind of hedge around that. Obviously, make sure that you legally, if you are legally able to itemize, just keep really good books and records so that you can do that you can offset some of your taxable income. So even though you're making the 100,000, your AGI will be a lot less, and therefore your effective tax rate will be much lower.
Okay.
There are also, obviously, if you are making 1099 income, business income, there are a lot of expenses that you can legally use to deduct against that, like, electricity, internet, cell phone, things like that. Just make sure you're keeping accurate books and records as to how much business usage each of those elements have. Before you go ahead and plunk them down as expenses on your tax return. So there are different things you can do to hedge against that, and that's something that we do see a lot. Obviously we're not seeing any of those massive tax hikes that you're talking about, but at the same time, we've seen clients, their business like, goes through the roof and suddenly they're making all this money, but then they have to pay this much in taxes. So I always advise them, hey, keep a certain amount of your gross income in a separate account, to pay taxes, because that sneaks up on you at the end of the year. And, yeah, you made, $2-3 million, but you have to pay, basically what, 40% of that in taxes. You better have that 800,000 like stored away somewhere.
Right. Okay. One final topic, entrepreneurship, because you essentially co-own three businesses, right? So I would love to learn about that entrepreneurial streak that you have as being a small business owner and scaling a company. And so let's talk about that topic. What's your vision for one of your three companies? What's your vision for that company's future?
Right. So just to be clear, so my wife is, as far as the third company, that's something that we're still in the process of building,
Okay.
because it's a relatively new thing. As far as getting into dietetics, I don't know much about dietetics personally, so I'm,
Okay.
trying to do my research and catch up,
Okay.
while also making sure that I'm staying compliant with my CPEs for accounting, tax, whatnot. But yeah, no, my wife, she graduated from USC, so that's obviously been a huge springboard into, us being able to lie down the groundwork, excuse me, for the third business, the dietetics business, where my wife is already starting to like take patients from an independent standpoint, to just I don't want to say coaching. It's not really coaching. It's more just guiding them as, somebody might be overweight or somebody, may have had an injury, whatnot. They need to like get back in shape. So she'll map out a plan for them. So it's another numbers based business. I guess we're a numbers based household, all around. I think we have everything in the STEM pretty much covered except for the engineering. But in any case, yeah, as far as the entrepreneurial side of everything, I mentioned how I got into Ravi Ramnarain CPA and South Florida tax firm. Again, necessity being the mother of invention. I knew I wasn't going to just kind of work for someone else forever. I wanted to move up, whether it's, if I wasn't going to move up in a company, I was going to, create my own business. I didn't expect the flagship business to be as successful as it has been. When I started, it was really just, let me just replicate my bank income. I'll work for myself, one man shop, and then two person shop when I met my wife, and then that'll be it. And it morphed into a 14 plus shop as it is right now. And then, as I mentioned, South Florida tax firm was kind of born out of that because of the need for, the general need for tax work and something that we weren't servicing at the time. It's really just seeing opportunities. Everybody gets opportunities, I would say. It's just very few people act on them, but it's seeing the opportunities. And instead of just, having hangups about it and think, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. It's kind of the whole Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad type thing. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's, how can I do it? And, just how can I make all of these things happen? And like I said before, I live a pretty, I don't want to say a frugal life, but just, just kind of, kind of keep to myself. I'm not like, trying to make it rain in the club or anything like that. It's really just a matter of keeping things conservative and just being ready when an opportunity does present itself. Because if you're going to start a new business or whatnot, you need some level of capital to get all the compliance stuff out of the way, to get your insurance. Insurance is a big thing that I know we didn't really talk about it here, but business insurance is something that if you don't do it right, it could have a significant effect on your P&L, if you will, like just on your what you're able to keep in a given year. But yeah, seeing things as they come up and just staying true and honest to your clients. And it's funny, I was reading something earlier today about the Jimmy John's founder. The guy, I think he sold everything to private equity, made like $3 billion, but he was 19 years old. He had a choice: either his father gives him a small business loan for 25,000, or he has to go into the army. And he took the sandwich route approach, of course, and it was very, very, very difficult, especially in a saturated market like that. But one thing he said in the interview that I was watching was, um, "There's no such thing as work-life balance. If you want to be, a business owner, you need to, be balanced in favor of work. I say, choose your significant other wisely," which thankfully I did. Someone who's right there with you, who's understands why you have to take a business call during a lunch, or whatnot, or you can't go to sleep this night because there's an SEC filing due tomorrow for your biggest client. But at the same time, then you might have a Tuesday where you just don't have anything going on and you can go out and go to the beach or something. It's just a very, very dynamic schedule, and I admit that it's not for everybody. There's some people that do want the structure of, a W-2 job. They know where their paycheck's coming from. They're not having to go out there and pound the pavement and bring in clients, things like that. But for those who do want to take the plunge, and if you do it right, it can be very rewarding.
Thank you for sharing. Amazing answer. So pretty much wrapping up, I'd like to at the end have a little bit more fun. We'll do two kind of fun questions. But by the way, so insightful, so much packed in there in the New York Minute, as you say, and again at the very end, we'll get your contact information, because it could be somebody looking to enter the accounting profession, right, in college. It could be somebody looking to change careers. It could be a potential client looking for your services, your advice, right, your
Sure.
guidance as a service provider. So, but two kind of fun questions before we wrap up there. So one is, what if you could only time machine, right? If you could only travel in a time machine to the past or to the future, which would you choose and why?
Hmm. That's really interesting. I don't have any, at the end of the day, you're going to have ebbs and flows. So I don't have any regrets about the past.
Mhm.
Um, it would be interesting, I guess, to transfer myself into the future
Mhm.
and really just, I don't kind of see where this whole AI thing is going to go, and what effects it's going to have, so I can just come back here to 2025 and be better prepared for it, because it's really taken off. Even in just this year alone, I feel like AI's uh, metamorphosized into something huge. And if it's this good now, it's going to be like in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say I would take myself to the future.
Okay. And then the final question, what is your spirit animal?
My spirit animal. Ooh. Um, I'd have to, if I had to just pick one at gunpoint, I would say a lion, if you will. It's like the lion's in the corner, they're sleeping, they're not bothering anybody, but the minute that someone tries to poke them, they're gonna just spring into action. And I think I'm very much like that too. Just from especially from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if you tell me that there's something I can't do, I'm gonna find a way to do it.
Okay. Amazing. So, so happy to have you today, and I would love for you to share your contact details, and it could also be your email address or your company phone number, whatever you feel comfortable providing. It could be your social media coordinates. So you have the floor for as long as you like to provide that, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do want to say, for the whole South Ozone Park gang, I definitely want to see you guys again soon. And obviously, if we South Florida tax firm, we do taxes nationwide. So we have a South Ozone Park discount as well. So feel free to hit me up on that. So for that firm, it's contact at southfloridataxfirm.com. So just as it sounds, contact at southfloridataxfirm, one word.com. And then the phone number for that entity is 1-877-SOFL tax. So pretty easy to remember. And then for the flagship business, Ravi Ramnarain CPA LLC, it's Ravi, RAV is in Victor I, at RAV is in Victor I, RAMCPA.com. So Ravi at RaviRamCPA.com. And the phone number there is 954-809-1311. Websites, southfloridataxfirm.com and raviramcpa.com, RAVIRAMCPA.com. And I'm also out there on Facebook and LinkedIn. Um, 16,000 followers on LinkedIn. I didn't buy any of them. They're all organic.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna throw one more just for the South Ozone Park discount. I would highly suggest you have a security question. Otherwise, everybody's gonna be contacting you saying they're from South Ozone Park when they're not. So you're gonna have to have some type of password or some type of that
Yes.
they prove that they're from South Ozone Park. It's gonna be some type of a question about a certain park or a certain basketball team or a
Yes.
certain restaurant or because otherwise people are gonna start dropping that name, but they're not from South Ozone Park. So just that's the former auditor and me giving you some advice as a former auditor. Check that. Trust but verify. Make sure
Yes.
people aren't just dropping that name
It,
to get a discount.
exactly. Exactly. And South Ozone Park is pretty big, so you can kind of there's some nuances that I'm sure I'd be able to come up with.
Okay, okay, that's true. That's true.
I've got a question for you on that. Like,
Sure.
where's the border? So the border of South Ozone Park goes all the way to, I guess, the Conduit or the Belt Parkway. But where's the northern border? Is it 109th or 111th?
When it hits Richmond Hill, you mean? When it becomes Richmond Hill?
Where it becomes
Uh,
Richmond Hill, yeah.
you stumped me. You stumped me on my own podcast
Never
episode.
known for sure, yeah.
Shoot, I'm going to ask AI later, and I'll put it in the show notes. But that's a great question. That's a territorial bat. Yeah, are you from South Ozone Park? Or are you from Richmond Hill? That's a border issue. So
Yeah,
we'll have to look that up. And I don't. But there's no tax difference between living in South Ozone Park or Richmond Hill. It's still the same taxes, same tax rates.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have some homework to do. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and hope to have you back again.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And yeah, please give my regards to your family. And yeah, let's definitely connect again soon.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay.